observable, the exhibited behavior that is kind of displayed in order to effectively perform. If I were to take an example of playing piano, I know to play piano, I know the key, I can decode the music notes. That's a skill. So the what of it is the piano, is the skill. But how do I play it? Not everybody who knows to play well, or they know the notations and they have learned the key and they know all that. But when do you say our student is competent and has this competency and the mastery, is when they can display in their behavior their knowledge, their mastery of that knowledge, and that they can be so prolific and proficient in playing it, which is the skill, but also they are confident and that they are very, very, joyful while playing, that they can make a connect with the audience, and that they can actually improvise, and that they can actually include the rest of the accompanying artists. So we're talking about a whole lot of behavior. So the combination of the three is when you say that you're able to look at this student's competency in terms of playing piano. I think that's a very, very simplest example at its best. Just three characteristics, I just wanted to kind of put the foundations of the CBE, that's a competency-based education, is that remember that every time we have observed lessons, let's say a class observation has happened, and I walk my teacher into my office and we first want to have a dialogue. And our first sentence oftentimes is about your lesson went well, or chan hota. That is a very bland and colorless, odorless expression. But a lot of time we focus on the teacher behavior, the teacher performance, that you had a mastery of the subject. Whereas in the competency-based education, the entire shift is on the learner. So in a competency-based education, if I've done a lesson observation of your lesson, my first question would be to look at how were the learners engaged, how were the learners stimulated, and how were the learners assessed, and how was the learners, if someone with a special need, how were they given those specific differentiated support, and was your objective that you had kind of declared in your lesson plan, was that achieved, and how are you measuring it from the learner's outcome base? So you can imagine the whole focus is in the CBE, and this is how it should have been, but a lot of time our whole focus is the teacher had competent knowledge, teacher had proficiency, she used appropriate examples. But in the competency-based education, we would say, did the students use the relevant examples for a real-life application? So you can see the kind of shift. Anytime you feel that I must stop, or how do I know, Raki, if anyone wants to just me to repeat or give more clarity?
Sure, I'll keep a tab on the chats and I'll keep you informed.
Yeah,
in case
because
there's a
I
question.
can only see my presentation.
Yes.
Yeah. And in the CBE, what's our whole agenda? We must know this. Like in a lesson, we have our objectives. When we are moving to competency-based education, we want 4 very clear appeal or a request for students, which is that they must take ownership, or we must give the ownership of learning. And how do we do that? That we see what strategies are going to help them to attain goals. The second one is, which is what is very, very central to the student agency, is that they are increasingly self-directed, okay? Which means that you completed a lesson and they should have questions like, what did I know before? What kind of confusion I had before this lesson happened? Is that confusion gotten clarified? What are the muddy areas I'm still struggling with? And how is my knowledge expanded? Let's say if understood, I've been teaching World War II, what was my pre-knowledge? And what was it something that I thought, I assumed, but now I have got a greater clarity? So what they are doing is a lot of self-evaluation and self-reflection, which is the third one, is to provide opportunities to reflect that what was clear, what is still confusing, what is still muddy area, what is it completely, beyond my understanding. So the students are able to kind of tabulate or map and say that, okay, I have had this understanding of it, but now I have moved to this understanding that I have a better clarity. So the reflection. And the fourth one, which Sita had last week touched upon, but very, very important to the central to the competency-based education, is about negotiating assessment. When I say negotiate, a lot of time our teachers say, who should decide? And I think that's where, again, CBE shifts the onus to the students, that can they choose a method of assessment? And can they also decide on the criteria on which they would be assessed, which is a very, very advanced stage of student engagement and student agency. That can I, for this lesson, do it this way? And this is also what we do it in the metacognition context, which is our CBE's whole thing is moving from a very cognitively passive to cognitively active study behavior. In a cognitively passive, we say, yeah, I came to class, I read, or I know I did solve the problems and I highlighted the text, or I kind of correlated the answer from the, questions. Whereas in the CBE, the cognitively active study behavior would be, I actively ask myself questions like, why does it work and how does it work? And I also write my own study questions, okay? So what is important is that students determine and articulate where they are on the taxonomy. And I love it that, I recently did a metacognition and taxonomy workshop for my grade 11 students. And I gave them the tool of taxonomy. And I gave them a whole set of questions, let's say from economics or from commerce or from psychology or from entrepreneurship, all the courses. So we kind of clustered them depending on their subject choices. And we gave them questions on it. And we asked them to identify until how far are they able to go in the taxonomy. And that if they want to move from level 1 of just simple facts, a question like this, capital of India, of course, Delhi. The next could be that how was Delhi decided as the capital of India? And what's the context and what's the criteria? And we move on to, if you were to really re-decide the capital, which would be the city that you would decide? And what are 3 arguments for that? And between Delhi and your new city, which one the larger population would, vote for or prefer in terms of these 2 cities? So what we are doing is to helping our students to move from the very, very basic content-driven, or what we call the knowledge, the lowest taxonomy. How can we do and actually help students identify where are they when it comes to assessment? This is a brilliant exercise that you all can follow. When you finish your assessments, you correct it and give it to them. Ask the students to actually draw the taxonomy and say how many content-based questions or knowledge-based questions they got it all right. How many, and this also becomes a good exercise for the teachers to see what's the whole landscape of taxonomy questions that you have. How many questions that, as a student, I could get it right that are application oriented. I won't dwell on it, but I just thought that, in the CBE, since we are talking about the student agency and student ownership, I think the whole assessment, the myriad or a mystical or a very mythical understanding of, assessment as a very, boogie word. If you can demystify to them and say that a question paper will have these many and you plot it, I think that's a really an amazing way of giving them the ownership. So the focus, as I said, is on the student first, the individual student. And the CB is all about a framework in terms of the teaching and assessment. And also, it is based on predetermined competencies. I'm going to give you some examples very quickly. I just wanted to get this very basic framework of theory, and that it is an outcome-based approach. Let's say all of field trips, okay? Is the field trip, our question is, how is it enriching a curriculum? Let's say you're teaching pigments and you're taking your students to a Sudarshan or a chemical factory. How are you going to assess, or how are you going to decide the predetermined competencies? Will you have a worksheet in which they have set of 5 questions, 10 questions, which they either have to interview the people at the fieldwork agency, or they have to make an observation, or they even have to do an extrapolation. So you give 3 levels of a very simple transactional, Q&A kind of competency. Second is that, make an observation and create a conclusion competency. The third one is that, okay, I saw this, where is this coming in my curriculum? And so you're kind of making a real world connection with the formula that you've learned or the pigment formation that you've learned. And the fourth one is the whole extrapolation of, this is what I learned and this is what I saw, is there a correlation? So you kind of clearly give them a roadmap. Let's say another field visit example I'm taking, that we take our students to Dharavi, okay? So the topic is about urbanization and urban slum phenomenon, the whole globalization context and the economy and the interdependence. So you actually have clearly formulated the curriculum connect for a project like this, okay? And it is interestingly always an interdisciplinary connect. And then the students visit the project in Dharavi, which is all about recycle and the whole economy and how urban slums are formed. And the third one, very important, is that maybe make the students write down what are their preconceived notions. You remember I mentioned about the behavior and the whole moral value ethics. What were the preconceived notions about a slum like Dharavi? And of course, they might have a lot of images that are very strongly driven by a slumdog millionaire or a gully boy. We have those very filmy depiction of a slum, and ask them to, when they come back, to talk about what were the myths or the prejudices or the biases that got busted. So what you're doing is that you're not only giving them a tool for reflection, but also you're giving them a tool for exploration, and to actually critically examine what knowledge level that they have been given to how are they forming their new knowledge. Now, how would you assess this whole experiential learning curve of visit to Dharavi? You give them options. They could either do a mind mapping of the interdisciplinarity of the subjects in Dharavi visit and the economy, or that they can actually do a conversation between 2 people, and they can highlight that either in the form of a video or in the form of maybe a small write-up, or it could be a blog, or it could be a picture collage, or it could be a research-based presentation of, okay, I've been to Dharavi, but I know very little about it in terms of its contribution to the economy and what it does to the recycle and what happens when Dharavi comes to a standstill. So you're talking about a huge research base. So student can actually make that choice. Am I making sense to all of you guys, girls, boys?
Yes, there's one question, but I think as you were speaking, it would have been answered. But nonetheless, I will ask that question. It's by Zenobia. CBE involves combination of subject around a concept or an idea? I think you answered that.
Yes, it does. It does. That's what I took that example. Another example that I could give is that, let's say we have Pune is very, very well known for Varkari Sampradaya. It's the whole Sant traditions, and every Ashadi Ekadashi, just before that, there is a huge procession of varis that go to Pandharpur. So starting with, CB also helps you to identify a curriculum that is contextualized. Okay, so let's say you learn some tradition, and then many times we just sit in the classroom and learn about it, and then we just get an exam or an assessment paper and it's done. But a CB would say, how do I make it a learner-centric project? So how many different resources you bring in, first of all, to make this whole Sun tradition, very alive and very joyful and very, very enriched. So you're talking about Sant Jnaneshwar, you're talking about a historical perspective, you're talking about a geographical perspective, you're talking about researching on why so many Varkaris and who are the Varkaris, you're talking about a whole sociological perspective of the class and caste and gender, you're talking about an environment perspective of why do the women carry those tulsi plants, and why is Vithala so black in color, and also why is that Avang sung by the women sons are not so well articulated. So you have a whole lot of perspective. So you can either choose to give it in the classroom, or you bring someone who's worked with those kind of questions, like a very amazing facilitator we have. And then you take them to the field when actually the Varkari, procession is happening, and give them a small set of observable pointers. This is very important because this is where you're demonstrating a predetermined competencies. And CBE says that all learning is not necessarily only instruction based on lecture mode. I think this gives us an amazing opportunity for them to observe and make notes and come back, and how do they present it. It could be in the form of a presentation, it could be in the form of a drama, it could be in the form of a research. So very, very important is that you look at the values and attitudes that's required for real life situation. And of course, it's an age and grade appropriate level. So, it's not really this kind of, sequentiality, but it does give you the fair, clear understanding of all the components that are involved in it. Is that to build the competency is important, but everything has to be a skill-based assessment, which has to be also a very open assessment where student can choose their idea of assessment and how do they want it. And also competency-based education talks about the fair or equity mindset. I'll come to that in terms of how do you differentiate the learners, and how do you, give, inputs for differentiation. And I think the kind of learning that you can, provide through the CBE also builds a lifelong learning. I'm just looking at students who have done a project on a Nag Panchami. Okay. Again, bringing the local tradition, local festival, and you bring the entire ecosystem of environment studies, the animal life, the interdependency, the season, and why is this Nag Panchami festival that's happening, and the traditional games. See, you don't even have to leave out the physical development, all the traditional games that is played during Nag Panchami, and all those, practices and superstition. Remember, again, I spoke about the value of why and how, the celebrations and traditions are actually destroying the whole ecosystem of the snakes. And you also then go into maybe a study visit to a snake park, or invite someone who has worked with snakes. So there's a lot of demystifying the fear removing attempt. I'm also trying to point out the lifelong learning part. And you just have had one touch point of Nag Panchami, and that you can entirely mind map, and also look at how it stimulates all the various faculty. It's a sensorial experience. Also, why during Nag Panchami kids put mehendi, and also literature, how snakes are looked at in different literature and different genres, and why snake used as a symbol in the medical world as a healing. So you're kind of bringing in a whole ecosystem, and that really creates an impact. Now, how is differentiation involved in this? Sorry. How is the differentiation engaged in it? And we know that there are children who are kinesthetic, or there are children who probably can be very, very oral, and there could be children who really are not so comfortable with all the visual presentations, or there are children who probably have attention span issues. Sometimes children, even with the autism spectrum, have an issue of sitting in the classroom and engaging in the classroom. So what you're doing is you're kind of providing a smorgasbord for the children to pick up one aspect of it and dwell in it. And it could be the music, for example, that is around Nag Panchami, or it could be about all the, one of our students did a wonderful presentation on how snakes are so badly represented in the Hindi films, all the Nagin and the dance and all that. And it was very funny, but also there was a deep meaning behind it. So you're also creating a landscape for students to make those judicious choices. And also, the whole point is that all the time the question is, how is this applied in real life? How is the behavior change going to happen after I understand something about the entire world of snakes? Remember, I spoke about the metacognitive, aspect of it, and I think this middle path of students being able to identify the mistakes and confusion. I think in the competency-based education, students, if they can be directed to know about it, and that I have to think about it, so there is this level of between the conscious competence and the conscious incompetence. If a student becomes aware of that this is what I know and this is what I don't know, and I think we're kind of helping them towards the mastery of know it well, so I don't have to think about it, instead of saying know about it, but I have to think about it, and know that you don't know, and don't know that you don't know. So I think this is also something that we can use, again, giving them the tool of taxonomy and the tool of metacognition, so that students are able to use this knowledge system more for skills and for values and attitude change, and not just for reproductiveness. So if you were to look at building a competency mapping of all the activities, let's say you're a rapid reader that you're choosing, map your competency of what level of competency what is that you're tapping. Or let's say you're doing, as I said, the field trips, level wise. In grade 1, you're going for this field trip, grade 9, you're going for this. Map it and write down what is the particular competency. And competency is, as I have again and again mentioned, it's not the knowledge system. So don't get very caught up with what syllabus are we covering, or which chapter are we covering, or which concept are we covering. That's only one part of it. But what we are talking about is what's the skill set involved, and what's the shift in the attitude and values. And similarly, if you were to map your art integration in all the subjects, You can also use similar kind of process. You can do community project if you have in school, or if you have all the lab experiments or experiential learning experiments that you do. Or if you look at the cooking day, that you use cooking day to explore interdisciplinary concepts, but at the same time you're also looking at varied skills of chopping and knowing those words, and you do crushing, you do grating, and all those finer words. But above all, also in the attitude element, how and why, for example, cooking is a activity skill that is highly genderized. And also for students to highlight that oftentimes when the cooking has happened and eating has happened, the boys have gone out to play and it's the girls who are still doing the dishes. And I've seen it again and again. It could be a cooking session or an art session. It's the girls who are busy cleaning the art palette and the brush, while the boys have already gone for um, a football or a basketball game. So you're talking about the whole, the three-dimensional thing of skills, and the attitude and the competency. This cannot be segregated at all in everything that we do. Yeah. So how is this benefiting in terms of the students? As I said, it is personalized. When we say personalized, of course, we are also looking at not necessarily one-on-one. You always create a whole, plate full of options, and the student can pick up. Also, it's an individual pace, especially for students who probably are not the best to just read and finish the chapter, but maybe watch a movie and maybe summarize it, or go for a field trip and summarize. It's a very, very individualized this. And we're talking about a specific need. When you're talking about a project, especially project-based learning, we're talking about very, very specific needs of the student. And the specific needs could be at the multiple levels. It could be just about a simple reading skill, or maybe a decoding skill, or maybe a comprehension skill, or maybe, of making a new thought process come alive with a writing skill. Meaningful assessment. And I think this is something that's, for me, the biggest attraction, and students just enjoy it, because this whole idea of give one paper and just assess everyone, versus you are, I've also done this before in the classroom, that after this, I ask students, each one, to sit in a group of 4, and all 4 of them have to compose, let's say, 3 questions. And our children are by now very familiar with lot and hot, okay? So they have to contribute 3 or 4 questions, which is 2 lot questions and 2 hot questions. From each group, you bring all this, and then you actually have a very mix, and then you actually exchange it. And children just love it, because they feel they have constructed this whole assessment. And also we know that if a student is able to construct a question paper or construct a question, I think that's the highest order of learning. And which is where the whole positive learning experience of not just a lecture method, but a more student engaged, positive learning experience that happens. And it definitely creates a whole set of broad skills of observation, practice, and questioning skills, curiosity, and probably sometimes interview skills. I've seen students when we have a project on migration in grade 7, it is connected to this whole urban migration and the rural migration and the whole civics chapter. We ask children to actually interview people who have migrated from their native place. And it could be a security, or it could be a neighbor, or it could be their own grandparent. And the children realize that when you're interviewing a security, first of all, starting with another language, another type of question, because a lot of security people in our buildings and societies and our communities have come from the northeast, or the north part of, a lot of them also have moved from there. So the students have to understand that, that you need to have this nuances of how do you frame your questions, what questions are appropriate. Look at the value learning that you have, and what question can be, disturbing, especially if you're a forced migration, because of a war, maybe it's going to create a lot of unpleasant memories. So I've seen students actually being very, very sensitive and very empathic. And also sometimes they've seen their own mother who migrated after marriage, hasn't really had any forced or a displacement migration, but because of a life event. The whole lot of questions are very, very different from someone who's been probably, who have left Pakistan and come during partition. So I think we're talking about a broad-based development of skills and emotions. Yeah, and for teachers, I think I don't even have to elaborate, but I think it's the most exciting way of teaching, and rather than those routines of now open the book and chapter number and then underline and highlight this and highlight that, you're actually creating an onus and handing over this whole transaction to the students, and you see creativity unfold in bigger form. It is time consuming, but teachers also can use a lot of teacher skills of questioning and giving them reflective points, maybe a quiz, or maybe they can actually present it in the form of not as a textual material, but it could be a video, it could be a well-researched mind mapping. So teachers to enjoy this, while of course in the beginning they have had some reservations. I've seen teachers actually grow leap and bound. Yeah, just the last one, just to support, thankfully NEP is talking about the competency-based education, to move from a textbook to a practice-based. I think for us, and I'm not saying 100% everything needs to move from the textbook to the practice-based. But if you start with the 20-30%, and then you slowly see that that seems to be a more sustainable, long-lasting way of students learning, you actually realize that once you create a model of ecosystem of competency-based learning, competency-based education, you are actually able to spend more time on the critical component called the ethics and values of education. So that's pretty much what I have now.
Yes, I think all this while I was busy making notes, and one question that came to my mind, maybe I'm talking on behalf of a few teachers out here, is that you said create a model of CBE and then you will actually get time to spend on building values and culture. But when it comes to creating a model, we know the challenges. So in such a scenario where students have diverse needs and they come from different backgrounds, how easy or how difficult is it to create a CBE model?
At the outset, it looks difficult. But if we were to spend the first, week or the last weeks in our academic year sitting and planning, and kind of take it as a goal based, that this year we will transact two ideas in this way: interdisciplinary, team teaching, and that we will have a more field based or a more experiential based. As I said, you don't have to completely throw this whole, lecture method, because I know it's not practical. But in a year, let's make two, and that almost becomes your embedded practice. Year one, we didn't do everything. We didn't do the Nagpanchami and the migration stories and the Varkaris. For example, we didn't do this entire thing of, using independence, struggle and this whole history and Ganesh festival and, Bal Gangadhar Tilak. We didn't do it in the beginning. But when you do two in a year, The next year is, okay, these two are now confirmed and practiced, and you just do an improvement part. But what next? So we are not saying that, this whole ecosystem have to be transformed, but make one year a kind of, and you map it. What do we do in grade 1 to grade 10 or grade 11 or grade 12? You map it, the whole school. So it's not the same teachers who are actually struggling to. I mean, when we did the Nag Panchami, we talked about what's the math element of it, what's the science element of it, what's the mythology element, storytelling element of it. I mean, it was so rich, and what's the language element of it, what are the songs available about the snakes in Marathi and Hindi, who are the poets. So everybody just did that one in grade 4, that one project which is a CBE based. And then, once you get kicked about it, and I've seen teachers saying, hey, you know what, maybe I can't do everything, but can I just add one element to it? And for older classes, this is very important, that give them the tool of self-exploration of where do they, function. Yeah, I see how do we measure competency is also use Bloom's to say, where are they stopping when it comes to an analytical question or an application. So you also can understand, and we saw this when we gave this full question and we were conducting this workshop and children had to solve it. Some children say, hey, I can't go beyond the third. And then we said that means you're learning when you're doing study skills, look at more focused on, the third level. And this is what we did also when we conducted, we removed the parent-teacher conference and we introduced the student-parent-teacher conference. So after the papers are distributed, students do an analysis and the parents are invited and the child is actually telling the parents that this is my strength. I seem to be getting almost all content questions very clearly. And in the comprehension, I seem to be goofing up when it is, indirect interpretation, which is also an application question. So for measuring competency, I think, I may be slightly wrong, but I help students use the taxonomy so that they understand where is their growth happening. And also thankfully there is no, when we talk about how do you measure competency, it has to be rubric based. Okay, so when you have asked the students in the class to make a film on, let's say, the pollination, okay? Now, we need to be very, very careful. We are not talking about, sometimes I see teachers getting mixed between the quality of video versus the quality of the content. Because if our whole competency measurement here is, we are not measuring their technical skills. We are mainly measuring their understanding of the concept of pollination. Has that come through? A lot of time our rubrics get wrong because we miss out on the clarity of what we are measuring. So in a morning assembly presentation, are you talking about, let's say you have the component of the the content, you have the skills, and you have the moral and values. You need to be very clear on is your whole focus on full class inclusion, and are they using appropriate visual presentations, objects to show how a festival is celebrated, and is there an appropriate, age appropriate, adequate content on why this festival, for example, is celebrated. So very important for us is this clarity of our rubrics. And I see teachers getting very confused. Sometimes a simple thing here, Raki, I've seen this, nomination for student council.
Yeah.
I mean, teachers would come up with, he's very obedient, or he's such a good child, he's always honest. Red flag. How are you measuring it? So you got to have very clearly tangible, and you can have two intangible, which are episode based or which are anecdote based. Otherwise, you miss out on, a notional idea of Lakshmi is a very honest and a very sincere. Oh, that sincere word is so overused and used in so many rubrics. You can't measure it. If it's about sincerity, you need to decode it. Am I a time on task, or will I always, if I miss the deadline, I will come and proactively communicate. How am I measuring it? Am I giving some perspective on how do we measure competency?
Yes, absolutely.
Pramila,
ma'am, do you have any questions? If you have, please raise your hand, and happy to take you on stage to clarify. Sarthak says, ma'am, could you please elaborate on fifth point? Which fifth point, Sarthak, if you could help us know that? Portability. Can you elaborate on the fifth point again? Portability.
Was that in 1 minute? Fifth point in which one?
Which second last slide?
Is that the last slide?
Second last.
Okay. So that's actually what we were just talking about. The CBE rubrics become benchmarks for skills that transfer across settings, allowing teachers to meet students where they are. So when you have this when we talk about portability, what we are saying is these are seamless across subjects. Many times our whole compartmentalization that, what works in math won't work in language. Shall I just show the slide again and then explain it? Are you talking about this slide, ma'am?
Yeah, this was
the number 5, right? So CBE rubrics become benchmark for skills that transfer across the settings. So when you're talking about an observation skill, and that could be used across the domain, right? Across the settings. So whether it could be a laboratory, whether it could be a field visit, whether it is about cooking day that you're doing, or whether it is about a demonstration that you're doing for a science experiment, we're talking about an observation skill across the settings, okay? Questioning skills, for example, is another across the domain, that whether students are able to articulate questions that are really appropriate. Sometimes you realize students ask questions that are really not relevant. Or sometimes students share an example of what you have shown as a phenomenon, but they're far, far from what you're talking about. So is the student able to correlate? That's another very, very important skill. So what they're saying is that you can actually, use similar kind of skill sets for across, whether you're teaching or whether you're, having them do some kind of let's say let me give you an example. We often have children, do this fireless cooking, or we actually are, engage with them for making salads. Okay. Now, what kind of rubrics will you have for making salad? What kind of rubrics? Children have made salad in their pairs, okay? Because that was part of this future readiness. We thought, they must know at least how to make salad and salad dressing, for example. Salad dressing was also used in terms of the whole chemistry in action in cooking, okay? The kids have come to you with their salad and salad dressing. What kind of questions, what kind of competency are we measuring here? So there's one basic knowledge, what vegetable goes with what, whether you, what kind of oil that, yeah, exactly, the ingredients that you choose, the oil base that you choose, what kind of an oil, and when do you put the salt, what's the temperature of those vegetables that are used, is it visually very appealing to you? So you have all these rubrics, right? These are all very clearly concrete. Now, next question is, we ask the children, so why are you learning to make salad? Okay, where will you apply this? I mean, you have your mom, and children said, yes, sometimes I can help my mom in the kitchen. That's one. Excellent. Maybe in future, when I don't have a place to cook properly, I can quickly make this salad and eat. Very good. Three is this, salad seems to be the most important part of roughage. You see the layers of taxonomy now, and it's very nutritional. Okay. Another question in terms of the competency building, for example, is what are the precautions you have to take when you make salad? Okay, what are the processes in making? Do you have to blanch it, before you use, let's say, palak or the salad leaf? And maybe you want to go further and you say, can you find out where, this is not native to India, where is this kind of a leaf coming from? So you're actually doing an analytic rubric. Really what you said, Pramila, is very, very true. The whole analytic rubric, children can build it. And in fact, ask them that, you're coming to me with your salad, come with 5 questions that I can ask you. I won't even have to do my work. They have already built their assessment tool. Are you getting now the examples are, getting very real? So there is a real life application they're talking about. And I also tell them, sometimes children, when they're cooking, I saw it recently when we were in Sec Mall, 60 children making momos, okay? But, when you see the momos, you wouldn't want to eat. So, after some time, you talk about the hygiene, the personal hygiene. Have you tied your hair? You don't put your nose, and you don't start eating, and, ushta karun. And then you actually correlate it to the COVID and why was that time we were all super cautious. So, I think when you have built this, when I talk about the portability, we're talking about the same rubrics. You can also do it for something else. That's what I meant by the portability. Yeah, so we have another one is a fireless cooking, as a golden hour option. They come with, khakra pizza or a sandwich, or sometimes they just make a iced tea. And then my first question to them is, why is this option even given to you? They must imagine a future. And again, this is where the competency-based education is saying, how are they making a real-life application? And one boy said, in future, I may not have a maid know to make all this food for me. I may not have time, and I may be living in a hostel which may not have stove. Bingo, So I think what we are doing is it's also a very, very lifelong learning aspect for them.
Yes, asking them the why.
I can just go on.
Yeah, asking them the why is very important, because I think even in the last session, Sita ma'am was talking about how they conduct assessments in IB schools, and that's where she said that, and she also related it to the Simon Sinek video. She spoke about understanding your why gives you the clarity. So that's something that she also emphasized.
Lisa, and the golden I want to also say this, we had this Bharatnatyam performance just since we just finished a Founders Day. while the kids were practicing, they had come up with this. The teacher had, in fact, for me, it's very important that I use this competency based education first on my teachers. So they had chosen this story of Barbaric. Okay. Now, the theme is called hashtag recycle happiness. So, my first question is, how is Barbaric's story fitting into the theme? How can you relate to this? And what is the moral of the story for the students? Because they're going to enact it. And, why have you chosen that? If you don't have that clarity of purpose, the story looks so completely, off the cuff. But what finally the students were able to do is that he has three boons. He had privileges. Despite all the privilege to conquer the world, he was not happy because his ego had gone to him. And finally when he surrenders that ego, and then in that space of blissfulness, he found that sense of happiness and that purpose. But you need to help students relate to that, because Barbaric story is a knowledge. The skill is all the why and how of it, but it is the behavior and the attitude is that we all have our privileges. We are all blessed with things. But are we using this for constructive purpose or for destructive? Because Barbaric says to Krishna, I can with my boon stop this war in one day. Because he can just wipe off the whole world with his three barns, So very, very important for us is to use this to say, that when you have the privilege, you have the choice of using it for constructive purpose. And that if your ego takes over, you actually realize that you're part of the whole destructive agenda rather than building peace and harmony around. So you can use this also for, what I call the co-curricular fine arts, to say why and the how of it.
It's all about subject integration. I think Pramila ma'am was here. Yes, Pramila ma'am. You can unmute yourself.
What a privilege to have you, Pramila.
I came in a little late, but I couldn't just sit down and miss your class.
Oh.
Anyway, what I felt was, if this was an offline thing, you could have done much more. Online kind of restricts you.
Yeah. And also one has to be mindful of the time. Otherwise, we all have seen how we log in, but we are not around the machine. And we all did that, right? We logged in and we were busy browsing. We were busy doing all the other chores. And that's what our children did. They logged in and gave their attendance. And they were busy chatting, or they were busy even taking a nap, So, yeah. So I think I just want to keep it very, very crisp so that, we know that average attention span is 3 minutes, Pramila, now.
It's gone down thanks to all the gadgets.
Yeah.
So one request to everyone is to please share the key takeaways from today's session. And any pressing question before we break for today's session, please go ahead and put it in the chat box while we have a couple of more minutes, so you can put down your questions and also the key takeaways. Don't forget the key takeaways, because it will help others who joined late to kind of take back those key takeaways from you. Could you explain the relation of...
So there is a question on, can you explain the relation of confidence with each stage from ignorance to mastery? I think this whole thing of, going back to moving from the unconscious incompetence to, the unconscious competence, or the best stage to be in is the conscious competence that really actually shows in the way that you actually display your mastery, right? And of course, unconscious competence is what we have in mythology with Hanumanji showing his, he didn't know his enormous powers until Rama, his guru or his mentor, unveiled it for him, saying that you're very, very capable of, that you're so, unconscious competence is also about, it so well you don't think about it, is that driving, that we all do, of the cars, that I don't do, but all of you, I know you do it. You don't think about it. Somebody can, even ask and you won't be able to decode it, because it's like asking the fish to describe water, and the fish will say, water, what is that? Where is that? It's become so part of that. And when it becomes kind of embedded in your skin, you just play it so flawlessly, like whether it's a piano or a musical instrument, because you have such wonderful muscle memories and such an emotional connect. That's what we mean by the confidence and the mastery.
May I say something?
Yes,
With your
please.
permission?
Yes.
I think overlearning also helps to some extent.
Yeah, the drill and the practice.
Yes.
We should never, ever undermine. I mean, today, what, we used to have as a school, I'm sure many of you had the practice, I'm talking about 40, 50 years ago. I mean, every morning we had around the breakfast school game, the morning breakfast. While eating, we just had to recite the tables.
Oh, we did it at dinner time.
Yeah. And I mean, today, I don't think it's just such a deep embedded memory of drilling.
Yes.
And we can't undermine and do away with it, I mean, 7, 8, sir, and I have to tell myself in my head, first thing is in my language, I would say it, because that's been the drill. And I think we shouldn't undermine some of those, I mean, even in the fine arts form, the dance form, there's a lot of drill and repetition, because there is that whole building the muscle memory. Yeah, I completely agree with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Pravina ma'am always comes up with these interesting punch. And thank you so much for being here today, ma'am. And what you rightly said
it's
is
such a pleasure.
Absolutely our pleasure to host you, ma'am, and for being patient to answer the questions being put up by the participants. Thank you so much for that. And as you rightly said towards the end, drill and practice, I think that's what we are doing as a part of the NCF Summit, where we are in this practice of bringing in speakers, leaders, industry experts to kind of decode the roadmap about what is it that we need to be doing and how is it that we need to be doing. So the what, how, and then of course the why is already laid down. Why
and the and I think for us, as the final educational agenda is the behavior change for constructive behavior based on morals and ethics. That is the real educational objective. And if we can, like a cooking day, if forget about all the amazing rolling of puris and taloing it and all the 10 million words they learn, all that is great. But towards the end, hey, where are the boys in doing the dishes? Or have you left after you finish your cooking clean place? Have you maintained the hygiene standards? And have you ensured that Maushis and Kakas who helped you in cooking also got the puris, or you're only going and serving it in the director's room? I think it's the nuances of this, values is what really is about the lifelong learning. And that's what CBE is emphasizing on.
Absolutely. You've made it very clear about the emphasis, and also you've simplified it as always in terms of how the CBE model can be set up in a school by taking one project in a year, and that's how you can map it right from the grade 1 to grade 10, and of course improvise on it. Yeah.
Just to give a closure, I'm taking this Puri Bhaji experience, okay?
Yeah.
One group can actually do a research on where are the potatoes coming from, and what's the farmers getting it finally, what's the cost in the, if you buy it in a wholesale in a retail in the neighborhood, and are there any varieties of it? Is the potato year-long crop or is there a seasonal one? And in India, just that one darling potato, you can run your whole CBE. Okay. Let's look at the oil that you're going to use. Let's look at the wheat you're going to use. Let's look at the salt you're going to use. Every component that you can actually break it and give it to small groups. And that is where, the whole differentiation, child with special need can actually choose what's the comfort area with which that person can go. I mean, the possibilities are enormous and the integrations are amazing. Yeah, I think I rest my case here. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for all the
Good
wonderful
night.
examples that you gave. The Puri Bhaji example was actually a great one, where you kind of set the tone that this is how it can be done in a very simplified manner, and the children can of course be given the choice. Voice and choice is always emphasized upon, so that's where they can choose what they can do and which part of the group they can be involved with. So great, thank you to all the participants for being here on time and being patient and listening and making notes and asking questions. Thank you, ma'am, so much as always for accepting our invitation and being here despite your busy schedule.
Lovely opportunity.
I know you're always traveling.
I just admire your energy and enthusiasm.
Thank you. Thank
teachers
you so much.
help teachers.
Lots to learn from all of you. And the hope is to keep going and keep building the community. That's what is the hope. And yes, I think for those of you who are in Jaipur or who are going to be attending, there's an event by ECA called Tod Ford Jod, where Lakshmi ma'am is going to be speaking. So in case it's happening on 10th, 11th and 12th. The festival is on 10, 11, 12. And you can find out on the ECA website about ma'am's schedule. And at the same time, we have in our event section a couple of events coming up. We have a digital boot camp coming up, and we also have a physical session on puppetry. For all those who are in Mumbai can attend the same. And for those who are not in Mumbai can, of course, connect with us to understand how we can organize it in your city. Hamid has shared the community leader form. As we always say that building a community is not one person's job, it's a collective effort. So please fill up the form in case you would like to contribute and become a part of the community and help us spread our vision together. So you can fill up the form which Hamid has shared. We're going to be connecting with you once the form has been filled. So that's it for today. Thank you so much. And yes, good evening. Bye-bye. Take care. Thank you, ma'am.
Bye-bye. Bye.